Welcome back, everybody. More overrated games today. After I did more underrated games, you knew that this was coming. I like to pair these video ideas together. It kind of makes one complete episode, just split into two parts. And this time I've expanded. Now I get to talk about every other game that was missing from my top 8 overrated games. Those were one game per console exclusives, I believe. I think I kept the same rules as my underrated video. And now this is just everything else. 10 games total to talk about. 2 games, though, that I have not actually beaten. And usually I wouldn't do this. I don't like to criticize a game, especially when I haven't played it to the end. But part of the reason why these games are here on this list, and I'll talk about them first, is just because their beginnings and my early experiences with them are so frustrating. So first of all, there's some commonalities between the games that I'm going to talk about, most of them anyway. And the first thing is that a lot of these games are better than I originally thought. They're not necessarily as overrated as I first thought when I experienced them 5-10 years ago, whatever it may have been. And the second part, in the same vein, is that I think these games garnered a lot of different reactions upon their releases. I'm going to talk about some big titles here. And it's clear to me that when these games came out, they would have been the best at the time in their series. And of course, when I just go back and I replay these games, again, I didn't play any of these games when they originally released. I played them at some point in the future, going back to the past and seeing, oh, what's all the hubbub about? I want to play these games. So I missed out a lot, and I recognize that. And for sure that, colors my opinion a little bit. And maybe it colors your opinion too if you experienced these games when they were first released. And with all of that in mind, the way that I'd like to present these games to you, if I can do a good job of it, is I'm going to talk about my experiences when I first played the games, and that's definitely when they were most overrated seeming to me. And I'm going to talk about my replays of these games. I went back over the last 3 weeks, or 2 weeks really, and I've tried to put at least 30 minutes into every game again. If I got too frustrated, I just quit out of the game. Some of the games I put more than an hour into to really refresh myself and just make sure that when I'm talking about these games and when I'm criticizing them, I'm going to give some valid and legitimate opinions. So you're going to get both. You're going to get what I thought when it was its most overrated, and you're also going to get my softened opinion now that I've replayed them. So the first game, and this is one that I did not beat yet, but I will keep on playing it. I will beat it eventually. This is Katamari Damacy Reroll. I believe Reroll is specific to the Steam port, the Steam release for this game. It's a really cool game. It's got a lot of interesting ideas. It's this puzzle game where you're this little prince who's got some, galactic father, galactic emperor, whatever, as a father. And your task on planet Earth is to take this little ball of garbage and roll it up and make it a bigger ball of garbage. It's one of those zany Japanese ideas that are just, meant to get you into the gameplay really quickly. And anything story related is just for frills and for fun presentation. The gameplay has a really solid idea. I love the idea. I just wish that the game could have better controls. I've tried playing it periodically, like every few months I'll boot this game up and I'll try to play a level. And maybe that's my problem also, because then you don't get used to how weird the controls are. For example, you're pushing both sticks in the same direction when you want to do different moves. That's the default control scheme anyway. The alternative control scheme splits it up, but there's a problem with the alternative control scheme because certain things like sharp turns have a more complicated input than the default control scheme. So all of that is a mess. The gameplay could be really fun. It's not perfect. There's some areas where you might get stuck and you don't have small enough objects to grow your ball, and so you got to backtrack a lot, whatever. There are so many ways that they could have designed the controls better for this game, and I don't know if it's problem specific with the port on PC. Maybe you guys who have played this game on console had a better time with it. Again, I like the game, but everything I've heard about the game has been positive. I've never heard anything negative about it, so it is an overrated game, and it's unfortunate that what makes it overrated is this terrible control scheme. They could have done a way better job with that. Now, the second game that I haven't beaten, and this is a series that I've wanted to get into for a long time. I've felt myself behind in this series for years, going back to high school when a friend of mine first told me that he was playing this game, and what he described sounded amazing to me. You are this assassin, and you guys probably know what game it is now. You're blending in with the crowd, you're climbing up walls and structures, and you're leaping across different rooftops. It sounded like a game that I would really enjoy. It sounded like some of the best parts of Prince of Persia, so I was looking forward to that. But then I tried playing it. Not back then. Again, I'm getting to all these games so many years later. I'm playing it on the PC version again, and the PC version stinks. The tutorial was one of the hardest things about this game because for whatever reason I was having issues with my USB controller. That happened again more recently, but I was able to move on from it. The tutorial also, and this is a bigger problem when I'm replaying the game, you can't skip it. And there's an issue with this game where there are no saves during the tutorial. So it's like, what, a 20, 25-minute tutorial, maybe longer. And if you decide for whatever reason that you're frustrated by it or you need to change some settings, you close the game, you come back into the game, you have to restart from the beginning. Now, when I'm trying to configure the game and all of these things aren't working and I'm restarting it and testing this and testing that, and I have to keep on going back to the beginning, that is horrible. Nothing was cleaned up for the PC version. How do they expect people to get into the series if they want this to be their first game? Which I do. I don't want to jump ahead in the series. I want to start with number 1. Now, moving on from the tutorial. You get to this part where you're leaving the starting area and you're going to go on horseback and you're going to go to a larger town. But along the way, there's this large spire, and the game wants to teach you one more technique, something about jumping from the top of the building down to a hay bale or something. So it's going to teach you how to land safely from a tall jump. And for whatever reason, I failed it over and over and over and over again. I just kept on going splat and dying. Do you guys know the viral video of that journalist playing Cuphead and he can't even do the double jump or the air dash to get to the higher obstacle? Yeah, that's what I felt like. Finally though, when for whatever reason it worked for me, and I swear this had to do with like button presses and inputs, not an individual skill issue, but when I finally made it on from there and I got to the larger town and the game was really opening up for me and more quests were being thrown my way, I just lost interest. I didn't even get that far replaying the game. I rage quit during the tutorial because of other issues. Thankfully I made a save, so if I ever want to, I can just load that save up. But I've just left the game in the pits. It's there, it's deep on my backlog, and I don't know when I'll get around to it, but hopefully sooner rather than later. Now we're finally moving on to the games that I have played in their entirety. And some of these games I've gone further, a little above and beyond to complete more of the games, not just going from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. So the first game is Mario and Luigi Partners in Time. And to start off, what I love about this game is the Mario iconography. In my last video, I complained that Mario Golf Toadstool Tour didn't have as much Mario fanfare as I thought it did. Replaying it, I was kind of sobered and I realized, this could be any kind of golf game. It's pretty generic. But not Mario and Luigi's Partners in Time. When you play this game, you know that it can't exist in any other franchise or any other series. The way that everything from top to bottom, from the environmental designs to the items to the equipment that you have, the way your characters are speaking, it's all Mario, and I love that. Where the game doesn't hold up for me, and I remember this from the past, getting towards the end of the game was just a slog. It dragged on too long, and there wasn't enough to really keep you entertained or to do in between the main quest. Now, this time around, I certainly didn't get that far, but the battles were just okay. They're not as complex as Paper Mario with the badge system, and I have to compare it to that game because I haven't played Super Mario RPG, so I don't know if this has more in common with that title. It's just pressing a few buttons and timing them in battle, and that's about it. Paper Mario, at least you could change your party members, and that was a little more fun. The exploration was fine. It seems like you can exhaust the areas of their secrets fairly quickly. So yeah, there isn't that much to say about this game other than it's a little bit underwhelming, and I'm sure that other titles in the series have improved upon it and they're more fun to play. The reason why this one is overrated, I've never really heard anything bad about it. I hear great things about the whole Mario and Luigi series, but maybe this is why they stopped making the games. They're fine. They're not as good as some of their rivals. Moving on now to Borderlands. And again, I've played this on PC. I didn't get to play it when it originally released. Even if I had it at the time, I don't know if my friends would have done any co-op with me. Now, is part of my experience not as good as it can be because I didn't co-op the game? I played it single player? Maybe. Let's talk about what the game does well first. The art style is something that looks good even today. When I watched the opening cinematic, I couldn't believe that I really liked the look of the game. I thought it would have been a little more aged, but nope. Cell-shaded clearly is a timeless art style, so that's great. The game pulls you in with its nice directing for the cutscene also. I thought it was great how they stylized it after how a lot of movies do their opening cinematics, so that was a nice touch. But of course, this is a game, so we have to talk about the gameplay more than the other elements. Let me just get one weird thing out of the way. There seems to be an issue with the field of view where when you are looking at something close up, right in front of your character's face, it seems like it's being magnified extra for whatever reason. It seems to just grow in size, or at least it takes up too much of your screen. Whereas anything at a distance looks fine. It should be that way. Now, Borderlands, at least this first game, does a lot of things well. The system that they came up with for the weapons and the loot and how you're constantly upgrading your weapons, it's good and bad. I think it's one of those things where you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. If any of you have heard the term looter shooter, I believe that Borderlands is one of the originators of that, or at least one of the games that popularized it, because it's exactly that. You're shooting things and they're dropping loot, and that becomes your stronger equipment. One downside of that is that you don't necessarily get the same feeling, the same exhilaration when you beat a boss and you get a new weapon. Yes, a boss's drop is certainly going to be better than what you have currently equipped, but it's not going to be a unique weapon that you can never replace. At some point, you're going to find some better drop and it's going to replace it. So you're just constantly cycling through weapons, cycling through grenades and shields and all these other things. The areas themselves are also fun and not fun. There's times when you first get into an area and you're interacting with the environment, like maybe you're just pressing some switches and you're adjusting drawbridges and things like that. You're opening up the world for you to explore. That's great. But in between some of that exploration, there's a lot of backtracking, and it sucks in this game. Even from the very beginning, just as you're going to and from the first quest givers, a lot of backtracking. And speaking of the quests in this game are like MMORPG quests. I've only played WoW and some other games, but I immediately thought of WoW and its pointless dailies. You get to a new area, a new zone in this game, and the quests just have nothing to do with the story, at least not in a way that's really engaging. The quests are just kind of there, they're frivolous, and they're meant to add some flavor to the world, I suppose, and make you care about the characters who are giving you them, but you don't. You care about your character, you care about progressing through the game, you don't really care about the dialogue that's always trying to be the same. This game, I believe, was at the very beginning of when media started to have that extremely quippy writing where every character had a sense of humor that was a little bit sarcastic and they could tell you off a little bit. A lot of characters in this game are like that. We've seen it rampant in the Marvel series and other media franchises. I can't stand it. Sitcoms are ruined because of it. And Borderlands, thankfully, it doesn't take it too far, but you can tell this is like the beginning of that trend starting. Now I'm going to talk about some games that people hold a little more near and dear to their hearts. And I'm not doing this just because I want to have some, spicy opinions or anything. I'm not just picking popular games because I want to make an exciting video. Truly, these games, when I played them, I thought that they were overrated. And in the case of this next one, Golden Sun for the Game Boy Advance, ironically, I remember it being unmemorable. Certain things towards the end of the game were sticking out to me, like the puzzles just being a little unnecessarily tedious. Like, it's not that they really force your brain to think in creative ways, it's just that you have to perform these actions and they get a little bit repetitive. And replaying the game, the puzzles didn't get that complex, but it was the same thing. It was very basic. Just you use a force and you move a pillar and that's it. That's the puzzle unlocked. What I will say about this game that's certainly a positive is it's probably the best looking game on this entire list. I could not believe replaying the game last week or the week before how great it looked. I said that Borderlands graphics, they're timeless. Well, these graphics, in my opinion, they're timeless too, just because of the detail that went into the pixel art. They created a beautiful world in Golden Sun. The sprites and the animations are fantastic. Even today, they're some of the best that I've ever seen in a video game. So I loved playing the game to see the different things, and I loved watching your characters jump into battle. That's another thing. The battle animations, even between the enemies, they're great. So the game looks great and it has some nice ideas, especially with how the characters interact with each other. There's a lot of dialogue, thankfully. Wait, maybe there's too much dialogue. Maybe the game just focuses too much on its story presentation at the beginning. Because in the hour and a bit that I played of this game, I kept an eye on my timer and I was thinking, I haven't spent that much time in combat. I mean, you're playing a JRPG here, and it's up to you to decide how much should be story and how much should be gameplay. But in my opinion, there was too little gameplay. Now, you can consider traversing the overworld and the dungeons as part of the gameplay. Personally, I don't, not unless there's a lot of rewards, like different treasure chests, and every time you go to a different room in the dungeon, there's going to be something to do there. So it's a lot of walking around, it's a lot of going to and from different people and places, and you're trying to just advance the story bit by bit. A lot of storytelling, too much storytelling. There needs to be more combat. And as for the combat itself, it's good. It's fine. It's not the most fun I've ever had with a video game, but yeah, it was done pretty well. I don't know. The game overall is fine. When something like the graphics are the best part of the game, I think that's fair to call it overrated because people really praise this game as being. Sometimes people call it Game Boy Advance's best game, and I certainly disagree with that. You guys are going to find out what my favorite Game Boy Advance game is in the future. Still a good game, still worth checking out, but it just didn't hit all the high notes for me. Now, the next game is another one, a bit of a cult classic, and I've only ever heard good things about this game. The World Ends With You on the DS. And I remember liking the game. I didn't dislike it. So when I replayed it, I was thinking, why is this in my overrated games? Probably because more recently, especially around the time of the re-release coming out, the Switch version, Neo, The World Ends With You, I guess. Haven't played it. People were really praising the original and saying it was one of the best games they've ever played on the DS. And no, it's not either. It does a lot of things well. It's really unique with its combat and its presentation. But the presentation and the art style, the whole aesthetic of the game, it's just not for me. That urban thing with a little like Japanese hip hop, which you've seen in some other media, I never really liked it. I never care for it. So not only is the game not stylistically up my alley, the characters also fall flat for me. The girl, actually, your companion, she's pretty great. Your main character, though, is just this emo brat who can't get along with everyone. And there are some glimpses of him being a decent character, and then generally he's just unlikable. And that's fine because I know from having played the game that you do grow to like him and he likes some other characters, he opens up to them. That's fine. It's just at the beginning of the game, compared with the different environments and all that stuff that I don't care for, it's just a lot that I don't like at the start of the game. Now the combat, I did say was really unique, but some problems with it when replaying the game, I found a little bit of it unresponsive, specifically the movement. I think there's some things you could do to make it a little more responsive. You can manipulate your attacks and manipulate your character with different taps to try to switch between them, so to speak. Even though you're not supposed to, I found that sometimes tapping my attacks and tapping the ground for my main character would have him move a little bit better afterwards. But that just shouldn't be necessary. In a game that is so fast-paced and so frenetic, you want everything to be really sharp. And generally it is. There's just the odd time that it's not, and that detracts from the gameplay. So overall, not a bad game. I think a lot of people would enjoy playing this one, and there's something unique in the combat for everyone to experience. Really, it just got overrated with all the hubbub about Neo The World Ends With You. And had people not been going on about it being the best DS game of all time and all those kinds of comments that I was reading, and even some friends were telling me, it would not be in this list. So, because the general, 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s, yeah, it's overrated. It's a good game. It's like a 7 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. It's fine. Now we have Tales of the Abyss, and this is a series that I am very fond of. I haven't played all the games, far from it, but the games that I have played, I generally love them. Tales of Symphonia was an amazing start for me, my favorite game in the franchise. Tales of Vesperia was pretty good. Tales of Fantasia on the GBA, not so good. And I remember a friend of mine, again from high school. It's funny how a lot of these memories take me back to high school here. Just to give you an idea of when these games were originally getting a lot of attention. Tales of the Abyss was his favorite game, and I would try to compare, saying that Symphonia was my favorite game, and we were each going to play each other's games at some point. Well, it didn't happen for 5 or 10 years. When I finally played Tales of the Abyss, I liked it, right? It's classic Tales, the battling and the combat is what I like. There's some issues where, again, for whatever reason, you can't map your companion's abilities to your thumbstick. Everything feels familiar to me, and it's something that I enjoy, but the characters are terrible. The main character, just like The World Ends With You, or even worse than The World Ends With You, is incredibly unlikable. And I know that they wrote this character arc and this character development for your main character, and he's going to grow, he's going to mature, but he is such a brat. He's a spoiled rich kid. He doesn't have a big appreciation for things, and in many ways they made him too dumb. Now, yes, so he suffers from amnesia, but I just didn't like it. Something else specific about the gameplay, and this is from my first time playing it, the side quests in this game are just generally lacking. The rewards for them aren't that good. They're scattered all over the world, and you've really got to hunt them out and go to each town when you got your ship at the end of the game, and they just weren't presented properly, I don't think. Why isn't the game giving you the feeling of wanting to tie up loose ends? There's just a lot where you move on and you move forward and you forget about a lot of the stuff that you saw before in the game. So Abyss, there's certainly nothing too wrong with it, but when you compare it to the different Tales titles, at least in my opinion, it falls behind on storytelling, it falls behind on the characters, and it falls behind, I think, in the questing, just largely unfulfilling. Now, the last 3 games on this list, these are the big titles. These are the heavy hitters that are generally the undisputed masterpieces. But I'm here to dispute them. And harkening back to one of the first points I made at the introduction of the video, I did not play these games when they were released, so I'm missing a lot of the social context, right? The pop culture, it's just lost on me because I'm going back so many years later and I'm comparing it to other games that have released since then, and I'm probably expecting more from the games than they can actually give me. So, Chrono Trigger. First of all, let me clarify, I did not play the Super Nintendo version, I played Chrono Trigger DS. And is the experience lessened because of that? Because I'm on a smaller screen, I'm not being taken into the world with a bigger TV? I don't know, it's possible. I can't remember a lot of my first time around with the game, except that when I finished it, I was generally dissatisfied because, again, all I'd ever heard was that it was a masterpiece, and when I compared it to other Final Fantasies or some Tales games, it was just far from my favorite JRPG. It was definitely a middle-of-the-pack JRPG. Now, replaying the game, I can certainly tell that it captures the feeling of adventure, and this isn't something that I would have picked up on at the time, but there's a lot of adventurous spirit in the game, and you kind of get into the world and the characters with the carnival at the very beginning. But what keeps me a step back from being fully immersed is the art style. I am not a fan of Toriyama's art style, except for in Dragon Ball. I haven't played a Dragon Quest game. That's another series that I need to get into. We can talk about that another time. I just associate Toriyama's art style with Dragon Ball. So when I played Chrono Trigger the first time, I'm looking at Chrono and I'm just thinking, this guy doesn't belong here. This guy belongs in Dragon Ball. I couldn't like the designs of a lot of the characters, including the girls who you get in your party early on. I thought rather than being an art style thing, it was just stylistically, they looked pretty stupid. Now, thankfully, as your party fills in, you're going to get some really cool characters, Robo and Frog. I love them. Frog is one of my favorite characters, not just in Chrono Trigger, but in JRPGs generally. I like what he stands for. I love his animation where he's puffing out his neck. It's really cute, really funny. Frog's a good character. Frog saves a lot of the game for me. I love the idea of mixing your attacks with other party members. You know, a lot of other RPGs could actually do something similar to this, and I think they would be better for it. The fact that you can combine Chrono's tech with Luca's tech or whatever, and you have a new tech on the field, and it's so much stronger than had you used the two individually, I love that. It's great combat. But I also remember in this game that there were certain awful areas. For example, the prehistoric area, I really hated it. I thought it had a lot of backtracking and it was just a little too convoluted. And then other parts of the game I just can't really remember, except for the bad ones, like the sewer area where you do get Robo. I'm calling it a sewer. It's in the future, whatever. It feels like a dingy sewer, and it is not fun, not at all. Now, just to leave this game on a good note, on a high note, because I do respect it, and I love the work that went into it, and I can kind of understand the significance and the importance of this game. The music is pretty amazing. The music is fantastic, and there's a lot of tunes that even though I can't remember the areas and I can't remember my first times playing them, when I hear those songs, I feel like I am being transported into some JRPG wonderland, and I love that. All right, moving on. Second last game in this list is Final Fantasy VI. Now, again, did I do myself a disservice by not playing the original? I played Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance. In my opinion, the Game Boy Advance games do an amazing job cleaning up a lot of the problems and making the games look great. Maybe they all look a little too similar, one from the next. They all have that Game Boy Advance graphic style. But still, that didn't detract from anything when I played 1, 2, 4, 5, and now 6. I've heard from other people that one of the reasons why they loved this game and how they were able to get into it from the very beginning is they put the game on, they just purchased it, and they're sitting down, they've got their Super Nintendo, and the intro, the mechs that are walking through the snow, and the music playing, it captivated them from the very beginning, and from that moment on, they were into Final Fantasy VI, and they loved it. For me, replaying the intro last week, I didn't get a lot of that magic, and I was actually watching the mechs, and they're going through the snow, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going on for a little while. I didn't realize that I could press A and start playing the game again. Whoops. Regardless, not that it's a bad intro or anything, it just didn't captivate me the same way that it did some others. The game as a whole, especially at the beginning, you can tell it's really refined, really polished. Like they've used their previous Final Fantasy titles to practice their craft, and what they're delivering in Final Fantasy is a very complete, neat experience. I see that. It's just not all that fun from beginning to end. I like the combat at the beginning, it's typical Final Fantasy with the active battle system. But the characters, and as you acquire more characters, I usually don't complain about a bloated cast of characters, but a lot of these characters just don't have personality. They've got something, they've got a trait that defines them, yes, but it's not like they're all being fleshed out to the same degree. Your main characters are your main characters, and your other party characters are side characters, and that much is very clear. Now, usually something like that's related to the story wouldn't actually bother me too much, but I also feel like because there had to be so many characters, the abilities and the actions of them also got split up and a little bit diluted. Compared to something like Final Fantasy V with a job system that I love, where you can make a character grow as much as you want and learn as many abilities as you want, and it really becomes a customized, fleshed out character. In Final Fantasy VI, it's like, okay, yes, this one has these abilities. I don't really care for those abilities though, so you don't use that character. Terra has a nice variety of what she can do, so Terra's great, and she's one of my favorite main characters, and her theme is amazing. It's one of my favorite themes in video games. But yeah, just generally unimpressed with the whole cast of characters, and that includes Kefka. And Kefka is probably the one thing that is the most overrated about this video game. If any of you haven't played it, well, I kind of wish that you'd played the game before watching this video, but Kefka is the main villain, and everyone says, oh, Kefka's such a good villain. Oh, he's so compelling. He's written so well. Oh, you really get mad at him. Oh, you really fear him. I don't know. Kefka is just kind of annoying and also forgettable. I can't be the only one who has this opinion, where you're playing through the whole game and you've heard so much about Kefka, and it just kind of seems like in typical Final Fantasy style, when he becomes the big bad final boss, it's just like, okay, great, we're fighting God again. But it's Kefka God. It's not just God. But it's the same thing you've seen before. I don't know. There's nothing special about Kefka. He is easily what makes this game so overrated. No, I'm kidding. Kind of. My point is, he's just another part of this game that fails to impress me. I've got other Final Fantasy titles, and they are my favorites. This one is a good game, and I would definitely want to take my replay and play it right to the end, just to refresh myself of the whole story. But this is certainly a title that doesn't hold a special place in my heart. Now for the last title on this list. And I should have clarified this before, but this list isn't structured from the least overrated to the most overrated. So the next game I'm going to talk about in Final Fantasy VI, they are not the most overrated games on this list. In fact, it might actually be the opposite, because I could see a lot of what these games do well. Rather, I structured this list in an order that I thought would be from most expected to most surprising. These games at the end here, I don't think many people call out as being overrated. So, the last one is Final Fantasy Tactics, and I can already feel a lot of your pain. And it's not because it's a bad game that it's on this list. Nothing on this list is a bad game, actually. I want to clarify that as well. There are no bad games here. But Final Fantasy Tactics, you have to understand, for me, I played Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced, and then I played Advanced 2, or A2 for the DS, and then some years later, I came back to Tactics, and I couldn't get War of the Lions, even though that's what's on screen here. When I first played this game, it was the original PlayStation release, and it had some problems. To start out with, I think that the gameplay is worse than the later entries, just because things like the clan and different side quests you can do involving that, they're not refined. In fact, I don't even know if they're present in this game, but I only played the game for about an hour. Now, the camera controls, for whatever reason, they're just not sharp. And I remember this my first time playing the game also, where in one of the first maps, and you're finally getting to use a full party of characters, you're deploying them in this little back alley, this dingy street with all these big buildings, and you're being ambushed there. The buildings, for whatever reason, are placed on this map in such a way that if you have your camera turned one way, then some of the buildings block part of that view. And if you turn your camera, then some of the other buildings are blocking part of that view. And there's just no clear view for this particular map. I thought that was a major oversight. I thought that was a poor design. In general, the level design is not all that impressive. I enjoyed it more in the later entries as well. And the graphics, this is in retrospect, but the graphics have aged, whereas I think the Advance and the DS version, those graphics really hold up today. But again, I'm not here to call a game overrated because of its graphics. I understand when the game came out, I understand what the game did, and one thing I'll admit this game does better than its successors is with its storytelling. Not that the other games lack storytelling, like Advance was done decently, but it doesn't really get into all the other characters as much. Final Fantasy Tactics for the PlayStation, and also War of the Lions even more so with its added cutscenes, and I'll talk about those in a moment. This game gives you more ideas and more insight and more background into the side characters. In fact, it doesn't even feel like a cast of one main and a bunch of side characters. It feels like there are properly a bunch of main characters, and the story takes place between their different conflicts and their different actions, and even things that go on around them. At some point in the game, you even feel like you are a side character. Now, I mentioned the cutscenes, and in the PSP version, War of the Lions, which I wish I had played first because maybe it would have made the experience more fun for me. These are great. They add a lot of detail and a lot of love and charm to the game, and there's something for you to become a little more attracted to. But overall, just because I've had a better time playing the later games in the franchise, I gotta say that this one is overrated. This one gets talked about a little bit too much compared to the other games. I think the other games are severely underrated just by comparison. But I don't fault anyone for having this as their favorite game. I completely understand it, and I bet you that the feelings that they had when they first played this game are the same feelings I had when I played Tactics Advance. So that's it for the video, guys. Thank you for watching. Again, I didn't purposefully include these titles to make it a controversial list. These are honestly the games that when I play them, I thought they were overrated, because you hear so many good things about all of these games, most of them anyway, and you expect to have the same experience that everybody else had. I did not. So here's some questions I have for my audience if you've gotten this far. I want to know how old you were when you played some of these games. The ones that are your favorites from this list. What memories you had when you played them, and what is it that stands out about these games to make them some of the best of all time? Again, it's not that I want to argue with anyone, it's just that I enjoy hearing about that kind of stuff. The way that I enjoy talking about the games that I'm passionate about, I want you to talk about the games that you're that passionate about. And I have a recommendation for everybody watching. I would like you to look at the games that you regard as overrated, games that are generally loved and talked about and revered, and replay some of them, even if it's just for a little bit. Because what I experienced making this video is that I really just didn't understand or didn't appreciate a lot of what these games did well. I didn't understand as much about video game history. I didn't understand as much about the business. I didn't have an understanding of the different chunks of the video game eras. And when, for example, I replayed Golden Sun, let me reach for something over here, I was impressed by the fact that they have better movement and pathing than this game. And sticking with Golden Sun, how about the graphics in that game? Like at the time when I was a kid or a teenager, yeah, I knew that the graphics were different compared to a game like Pokemon, but I didn't know that they were better. So that's just a little lesson that I was able to glean from this experience. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you'll post your comments about some of your favorite games and why you love them so much and what your memories are with them. Again, thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.